The moment my mother-in-law tapped her wine glass and told the whole restaurant that my husband would be paying for everyone, all 14 people, 3 bottles of wine, and every plate of food, nobody had thought twice about ordering. Something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not the usual wave of embarrassment I'd swallowed for 3 straight years. Just calm. The kind of calm you feel when a decision is already made and you're only waiting for everyone else to catch up. My name is Nora. I've been married to my husband Mason for 3 years, and before that we dated for 2. 5 years spent loving a man who puts his mother above the truth. I'm 31 years old. I'm a certified accountant, and I handle the finances for 11 small businesses in my city. I've done this job since I was 26. I mention this not to impress anyone, but because it matters. It matters that I understand exactly how money moves. I can look at a bank statement and read it the way most people read a text message, instantly, completely missing nothing. My mother-in-law's name is Diane. She's 63, hasn't worked in years, and has spent most of the last decade treating her son like a walking wallet. When Mason and I first got serious, I thought maybe I had misjudged her. She brought wine to our first dinner. She hugged me on Christmas. She told me once, and I've replayed this line in my head 1,000 times since, that she was so relieved Mason had finally found someone grounded. I understand now that grounded simply meant I had money and didn't mind spending it on her family. It began small, the way these things always do. A dinner paid here, a car repair covered there. Mason's younger sister, Brooke, had a baby and needed a crib, and somehow that bill landed on our shared card. I brought it up once. Mason said it was family, that Brooke was struggling, that it wasn't worth fighting about. I let it slide. That was my first mistake, and I made it on purpose. And I've been paying for it ever since. By our second year of marriage, Diane was calling Mason 2 or 3 times a week with a new request. The roof needed work. Her HOA fees were due. She'd found a cruise she couldn't pass up and just needed help with the deposit until her next check arrived. A check she receives in full every single month and spends on everything except roofs and HOA fees. I started a spreadsheet because that's what I do when something eats at me. I write it down. Over 2 years, Mason had sent just over $19,000 from our joint account to his mother and sister. $19,412 to be exact. I have every transfer, every date, every amount, every name on the receipt. I have the 3 separate times Diane texted me directly asking for money, and the 0 times she ever paid a cent of it back or even said thank you. Mason knew I'd noticed some of it. He had no idea I'd tracked all of it. The birthday dinner was Diane's idea, her 63rd, at a steakhouse downtown that charges nearly $50 for a small side of mac and cheese. She invited 14 people, most of whom I barely knew, cousins, her book club friends, and a neighbor in a bow tie who finished 2 appetizers before the bread even reached the table. Mason had mentioned the dinner to me 2 weeks earlier, in that casual tone he uses when he's already decided something without me. He said his mom wanted to celebrate big this year. He never said he was planning to cover the entire bill. He didn't need to. I already knew. What he didn't know was what I'd done 3 days before. I want to explain this part clearly, because I didn't act on impulse. I'd been thinking about this moment for 4 months. I'd already met with a family lawyer, not because I was certain I wanted a divorce, but because I needed to understand what was mine. I'd quietly opened a new checking account at a different bank entirely. Nothing connected to our usual credit union or our joint account. I'd moved my paycheck there 6 weeks before that dinner. I'd paid off and closed my half of the shared card. And that night, before we even left the house, I slipped my new card into my purse and left the old joint card sitting on my nightstand. Mason never noticed. He was too busy ironing his shirt and talking to Brooke about timing. The restaurant was loud and warm, the way expensive places always are on a Saturday night. Diane was already there, already on her second glass of champagne, already holding court at the head of the table in a sparkly top she'd clearly bought just for this. She lit up the second she saw Mason. She gave me a side hug, the kind where only our shoulders touch. I sat down, smiled, and ordered the salmon. For the next hour and a half, I watched her run the show. She ordered for everyone. She told the server they'd be eating family style, then named dishes nobody else had agreed to. She refilled her own wine before anyone else's glass was even half empty. She told the same story about a trip to Arizona 3 different times, and each version got a little more dramatic than the last. Mason laughed every single time. Then the plates were cleared, and Diane tapped her glass. She thanked everyone for coming. She said family meant everything. She looked at Mason with that expression I'd watched her wear for years. Not quite pride, more like ownership, and announced, "I think it's time to settle up. My son takes such good care of his mother." Everyone laughed. It felt rehearsed because it probably was. Mason reached across the table for my purse the way he always did when a bill came, his hand out, my bag open, no words needed. It had felt like teamwork once. I was foolish enough to believe that's what it was. He pulled out the card, walked it to the machine the server had brought over, and typed in the total. I already knew it was somewhere north of $800. I'd done the math from the menu before we even sat down. The machine beeped. Not the soft chime of approval, the other sound, flat and final, the one that means no. Mason tried again, slower this time, hoping the machine had simply made a mistake. It beeped again. Diane leaned forward. "Everything okay, honey?" Mason's jaw tightened. He came back and leaned down to me, voice low. "It's not going through. Do you have another card in there?" "Which card is that?" I asked. He showed me. "The joint card." I looked at it, then looked up at him. "That account is closed." He stared at me. "What? I closed it weeks ago." Across the table, Diane had gone completely still, the way a woman does when she's spent decades listening for financial trouble. Mason straightened up, voice tight but controlled. "Nora, what is going on?" "I'll explain later," I said, "but that card isn't going to work." He glanced around the table, 14 faces, the neighbor in the bow tie, Brooke bouncing her baby, Diane's book club friends who had already finished the wine and were now watching with the particular interest people get when they sense a scene about to happen. "Do you have another card?" he asked. "Yes." He held out his hand. I looked at his hand. I looked at his face. 3 years of dinners, transfers, a spreadsheet, a $19,000 hole in our savings, and one conversation I'd had with myself at 2 a.m. months ago, asking how much longer I planned to keep doing this. "I do have another card," I said calmly, "but I'm not handing it to you to cover this dinner." Someone at the table gasped. Diane set down her glass. "Excuse me?" I turned to face her, not angry. I want to be clear about that. Anger would have taken more energy than I had left to give, and I'd been saving mine for a while. I hadn't said I wouldn't pay. I'd said I wasn't going to hand it to Mason. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked to the server myself. I handed her my card, my account, my money, and asked her to run the full total. When I came back, Mason's face had shifted from tense to something closer to scared. Diane spoke first. "Well, she said, in the voice of someone trying to take control of the room again, "I suppose that's one way to ruin your mother-in-law's birthday." "I haven't ruined anything," I said pleasantly. "I just paid the bill." "You embarrassed my son." "I paid $847 for your birthday dinner, Diane." I'd say, "He came out ahead." Brooke made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough and quickly covered her mouth. Diane lifted her chin. "After everything this family has done for you, after how we welcomed you in." That's where I stopped her. Not harshly, just plainly. "I have a spreadsheet." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I keep records. It's literally my job." I reached into my purse, the same purse Mason had just dug through looking for a card that no longer worked, and pulled out my phone. I had the document saved and ready, not because I'd planned to show it at her birthday, but because I'd learned that documentation should always stay close. $19,412. That's what Mason and I have sent to cover your expenses, Brooke's expenses, and 2 other family requests over the last 2 years. I have every date, every amount, every account it came from. I set the phone on the table, screen facing up. "So, when you say, 'after everything we've done for you,' I genuinely, like to hear what that means, because I've been keeping the other side of that ledger too, and professionally speaking, it doesn't balance. The table went silent in a way 14 people almost never manage together. Mason sat down slowly. "Nora, I'm not done talking about this." "I know," I said gently, because I meant it gently. "I'm not doing this to humiliate you. I'm doing it because I've stayed quiet for 3 years, and quiet hasn't worked. So I'm trying something different." Diane turned to her son. "Are you really going to let her speak to me this way?" Mason opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't rush to defend his mother. I don't know if it was the spreadsheet, the closed account, or simply standing in a packed restaurant with an unpaid bill that finally made real something I'd been trying to show him for 2 years. But he stayed quiet. I picked up my phone, sat back down, and finished my water. Diane left 20 minutes later, before my card was even returned. She kissed her friends goodbye, thanked everyone for coming, and walked out without a single glance at me. Brooke gathered her baby and her bag, gave Mason a long look that clearly meant we'll talk later, and followed her mother out. The neighbor in the bow tie stayed for the free birthday dessert and seemed to have a wonderful evening regardless. On the drive home, Mason was quiet for so long I thought he might not speak at all. Near our exit, he finally said, "You could have told me." "I did," I said. "Twice the first year, once the second. You told me it was temporary." Silence again. "The account, when did you close it?" 3 weeks ago." "Were you going to tell me?" "Yes, after tonight." He sat with that. The highway lights crossed his face and he looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. "Are you leaving me?" he finally asked. I thought hard about how to answer honestly. "I don't know yet," I said, "but something has to change. Not eventually. Not after the next emergency, now. And I need to know you understand that and that you mean it." He didn't speak for a long while. Eventually he said, 19,000. I didn't know it was that much." "I know," I said. "That's part of the problem." The next morning, I emailed Diane the spreadsheet. Not out of cruelty. I attached a short note, just 3 sentences, saying I had no interest in being her enemy, that I'd welcome a relationship with her built on something other than access to her son's wallet, and that I was open to talking if she wanted to. She read it. I saw the read receipt. She didn't respond for 11 days. When she finally did, it wasn't an email, just a 4-word text. "We should talk soon." I didn't answer right away. I let her wait 2 days, not out of spite, but because I had a full week of client work, and because somewhere between that spreadsheet and that dinner, I'd remembered my time is worth something. It always had been. I just stopped acting like it. Mason and I have been in couples counseling for 6 weeks now. Our therapist is sharp and quiet and has a way of asking questions that leaves no room for anything but the truth. Mason has said things in that room I never expected to hear from him. I've said things I didn't expect either. I don't know yet if our marriage makes it through this. I think that's an honest answer, and I think that's okay. What I do know is this. The night I handed my own card to that server and paid $847 for a dinner I didn't choose, at a restaurant I didn't pick, for a birthday I was never asked about, that was the last time I paid for something I never agreed to. Not because I made some big speech, not because I won an argument, but because I had already moved my money and gathered my proof, and when the moment arrived, I was ready. I don't need anyone else at that table to understand what happened. I only needed to finally act like I understood it myself. There's a particular kind of tired that doesn't come from working hard. It comes from working hard for people who never once stop to ask if you're tired. I carried that feeling for 3 years, and I didn't fully recognize it until the night it finally lifted off my shoulders. What happened at that dinner wasn't luck. It wasn't some twist of fate. It was the result of a simple truth I'd finally stopped avoiding. Every action adds up. Every transfer Mason sent without asking me first, every dinner Diane assumed I'd cover, every time I stayed silent and paid anyway, none of those were separate little moments. They were a pattern, and patterns don't break on their own. I had to choose to break it, and then I had to actually do the work. That's the part nobody talks about enough, the actual doing. Being angry is easy. Feeling wronged is easy. What's hard is sitting at your kitchen table at 11 at night, opening a spreadsheet and tracking every transaction with the same care you'd give a client's books. What's hard is calling a lawyer before you even know what you want, simply because you believe you deserve to understand your own choices. What's hard is opening a new account, moving your paycheck, and telling no one, not to deceive anyone, but because you quietly understand that protecting your own security comes first. That's what I mean when I say I use my head, not coldly, but clearly and honestly. Diane wasn't some villain in a story. She was a woman who had learned over many years that asking always worked, that Mason always paid, and that nobody ever told her to stop. I was part of building that pattern. I let myself be. Understanding that, really sitting with it instead of just being furious about it, was what turned things from simply reacting into actually changing something. And then there's the part about holding your ground. The night of that dinner, when Diane lifted her chin and accused me of humiliating her son, every old habit in me said to soften it, apologize, smooth it over, and deal with the real issue later. I didn't. Not because I felt brave, I didn't, but because I had already made my decision, and I had the proof to back it, and I finally understood that backing down right then would have cost me far more than $847. Doing the right thing when it's uncomfortable isn't some trait certain people are simply born with. It's a muscle. I just hadn't been using mine. Diane's silence for those 11 days didn't sting the way it would have a year earlier, because I'd finally stopped measuring my worth by how fast someone answered me. I still don't know how my marriage ends, but I know exactly how that night ended. I paid my own bill, said what was true, and walked out into the night air feeling like myself for the first time in longer than I could remember. Whatever happens next, I built that moment myself. Nobody handed it to me. I planned it, documented it, and when the moment finally came, I didn't flinch. That's the only thing I want anyone to take from this. Not anger toward Mason, not judgment toward Diane. Just this. Know your numbers, trust your own clarity, and once you've done the work, never apologize for it.